afternoon. We are pleased to have here Dr. Karim, who is a Principal Research Fellow at the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies in Malaysia, where he performs policy-oriented research into the history of ideas, interfaith issues, and inter-Muslim dynamics. His competence includes civilizational implications of globalizing trends within Muslim societies and their reciprocal relation with Euro-American cultures. He earned his doctorate cum laude from the Institute of Islamic Studies at McGill University in Montreal, and he has taught in North America for over 15 years Arabic language and literature and Islamic disciplines at Columbia, NYU, Fordham, the University of Virginia, and the University of Maryland. He served in Malaysia as Professor of Islamic Thought at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, and in Singapore at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And I am pleased to turn the floor over to him.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Rumi Forum for extending the invitation to share with you some ideas about a topic that is increasingly being raised in different circles and impacts directly on our global reality. The idea that somehow Muslims are not part of the modern scene, that their history, their tradition, their religion in particular, has excluded them from what most people understand or interpret to be modernity, and that they have somehow walled themselves off or excluded themselves from engaging directly in issues that the rest of the world is busy undertaking, whether it's economic, political, or issues relating to faith and mutual relations between groups and civilizations and religions. And if you scan the literature and you see what's being published and discussed in the last decade, especially since 9/11, about the global stance of Muslim societies and peoples across the world, you'll find that there's a recurrent theme that reappears, that the Muslims have a problem with modernity, that they have never really settled or clarified to themselves whether they want to be part of what the globalized, contemporary, modern scene engages most societies, particularly the issue of secularity, whether Muslim societies can accommodate in some way a secular stance, especially also the idea of science and technology. At the root of those enterprises is a view of rationality that puts the human in charge of their destiny and able to control and master natural forces and advance in terms of the technological mastery of forces which allow people to be part of the modern age. And we find this view now amplified. Of course, it has a history. There has been a tendency over several centuries, especially during the heyday of imperialism, when the white man bluntly assumed that Asiatics and dark-skinned peoples were just incapable of thinking rationally or of mastering the intricacies of science and technology, as it had developed and spread from the time of the Enlightenment, 18th century, primarily in Western Europe, France, Germany, England, and other major European nations. And it was at that time that the suppositions and assumptions which underlie modernity became established and widespread. Now, modernity means the era from the Enlightenment until recently. Most people think of our age as a postmodern age. Modernity represented a break with the authority of religious institutions, particularly the Catholic Church, with its dogmatism and its monopoly of truth, and its uneasy relationship with rationality, which led to the undermining of faith-based view of the world. And we all know that people like Galileo were tried as heretics because they questioned certain dogmas that the Catholic Church upheld. So the European enterprise, which it spread over the globe, became a means by which certain assumptions about non-European races became accepted without much questioning. Arabs, Indians, Chinese, people of other races were not able to partake of modernity and could not have achieved the same technological and scientific advances that the Europeans did. There was always something unique about Europeans, exceptional. Nowadays, of course, it's particularly Americans who see themselves as some form of exceptional contribution to world advance, economic and financial order, and scientific and technological success. And there was undoubtedly a wash-off effect. Many Muslim thinkers and community leaders who were interested in trying to reform their societies and meet the challenge from the European presence, colonial domination and exploitation, had an inferiority complex. Many of the early reformers, the late 19th and early 20th century, in the Arab world and in India and subcontinent and other parts of the Muslim domain, they saw that the way to advance was to adopt the rational worldview and the scientific and technological advances that Europe had clearly demonstrated were superior and effective, and that there were certain aspects of their own tradition, particularly a kind of obscurantistic, mystical obsession, overemphasis on certain spiritual and faith-based disciplines that were holding them back. So there was an implicit sort of acceptance that their view of us has something true. We have to, for example, get rid of these Sufi orders. That was a very popular perception 150 years ago. The Sufi orders, which were so widespread in part of Muslim societies, were seen by many dynamic, young, westernized Muslim intellectuals as obstacles. We see that with Kemal Atatürk, for example, in Turkey and in other parts of the Islamic world. And there was an assumption that Muslims had to catch up somehow. Muslims are caught in this dilemma. They have to catch up to try to achieve what has been achieved by Euro-America. Let's use that term rather than the West. And therefore they have to turn their back on aspects of their own historical, social, and religious experience, which they see as factors that hold them back. We see, therefore, that we find Muslim countries who would like to get nuclear technology, or at least industrial technology, or become a base for information technology on a par with that which is dominated and monopolized to a large extent by Euro-American societies. And so the issue became one of, why didn't Islam develop its own form of modernity? It's well known that there was an intellectual and rational trend in Islamic thought and history, which had sources in the same intellectual and rational experiences that European modernity derived much of its worldview from, the Greco-Hellenic rational tradition of philosophy and science. We know that for close to a millennium, the Hellenic rational disciplines were preserved and cultivated and advanced among Muslims, whereas in Dark Age Europe, they were more or less forgotten or had vanished. They were recovered for the Europeans by a massive translation wave from Arabic into Latin and Hebrew in the 13th and 14th century, primarily through Andalusia. And that body of literature had been transposed from earlier Hellenic sources in the 8th and 9th centuries, from Eastern Mediterranean lands into the Central Islamic domains. So there was this double translation flow of thought, which preserved Greek or Western science and technology.